Okay, everyone, please settle down. Of course, this is always the great Seth Haberman panel when he handles more people that live on planet Earth at TVOT. And he's the only moderator I know who can do that. Well, I can't think of that vocabulary word, thank you. But Seth is a consistent moderator and, of course, CEO of Visible World that won a technology award last night for their high-yield platform. A little promo for you, for Visible World. So thank you very much, and welcome everyone here, and enjoy yourselves.
So I understand there are a lot of
keep it close to your mouth. Yeah.
there are a lot of nervous publicists in the House about the questions that we're going to ask. There's a quote attributed to Molière that says, of all the noises known to man, opera is the most expensive. And you might ask, why would I talk about opera at a TV of technology? And if you're interested, there's a fascinating article that someone named Mark Shubin wrote about the relationship of opera and television technology. Because opera was so expensive to produce, it raised the scale of everything, and what instantly people started to think about was, how do we let other people see what we're doing, or how do we let people hear what we're doing? And so the first live transmissions of remote listening were opera. First it was acoustic air pumped acoustically, vibrating the sound. Then it became wired transmissions, and then it became wireless transmissions. And so opera was the first place that electric lamps were used, because they were, again, since they were so big, if you had candles, it was very dangerous, and it got very very hot. And so opera is this interesting intersection with a lot of what we think about as modern television technology. In 1877, Alexander Graham Bell did one of the earliest transmissions of sound of an opera. It was an aria, and by 1878 they were carrying things long distance in Switzerland. In 1880 in the United States, Edward Fry and William Herder effectively created electronic home entertainment by listening to operas in their own home via telephones. And what was interesting is, and then a few years later in Lisbon and Madrid, they had services where you could listen to the opera, and the services were based on an annual subscription fee for unlimited opera, or you could pay per performance, or you could go to an institution and put coins in and get pay per listen. And so the models of what we think about now of subscription, of unlimited pay, of pay-per-view, all existed in the 19th century for opera. And in fact, those first operas also all had advertisements. In 1934, everyone thinks about 1939 World's Fair as the first transmission of television, demonstration of television, but it was actually 1934. Carmen was broadcast to a limited number of people on the BBC TV. And so the business models that we take for granted today for cable and pay-per-view, subscription and advertising, all existed either at the end of the 19th century or the beginning of the 20th century. So that always sort of says to you, is there anything new under the sun? Like, what's really new? And so what I'm going to ask all the panelists to do is to very quickly introduce themselves and to tell me the newest and most important thing that they're working on, and is it evolutionary or revolutionary? And so we'll go in order. Nikos.
Hi, I'm Nikos Iatropoulos. I am the SVP of Business Development at Pixel. What I'm most excited about today, and it is evolutionary, is the applications of deep learning algorithms in image recognition and being able to extract information out of video that was never before possible.
And why is that important to us today?
I know you're going to ask me about metadata later, so I'll bring that up then, but I think the more we know about the video being consumed, the better intelligence we have, then we can use that intelligence to understand why people are consuming a particular segment of a video, and then make better recommendations or allow them to search to that particular point in time. So an example might be that I'm watching or I'm searching for a TV episode that might be a Modern Family episode where I remember that Jay was on a golf course or in a hospital. Now we're able to extract all that information automatically, time-code it, and take you to that very specific moment in that episode that you're looking for.
All right, Elisabetta.
Yeah, Elisabetta Romano, head of TV and media business in Ericsson. And so our vision regarding TV, first of all, is that what will happen in the next 5 years will be much more disruptive than what is happening in the last 50 years in the television. And it's not going to be all about technology, but business model, I mean, a lot of changes. And
Rita warned me that she was not going to answer any of the questions I asked, but just say whatever she wants. And I warned her that I was going to push back. So what's the most important thing that you're working on?
So, I mean, it's looking at what is happening is a lot of personalization and immersive experience. So when it comes to technology that will enable, personalization and immersive experience is, of course, we think about 5G, because 5G will enable...
That's the three most important things. So evolutionary or revolutionary?
Is a revolutionary.
Revolutionary. Which one? Immersive?
Immersive and personalization. There is nothing about personalization now, so it's, we have to see still, most of it.
All right. James.
Hi, I'm James Field, product manager for Infinite Video at Cisco, where we basically have an amazing product which enables service providers, media companies, and content owners to reach the fragmented audience across pretty much any consumer device, where you can bring your own device to your home to consume media, and we make democratize that, enabling you to monetize, reach your audiences, and make sure your brand is available across all those areas. And that's revolutionary because it allows you to build apps in minutes without needing to code.
And why is that revolution?
Because today you have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, you have to wait 6 months to reach an uncertain audience on a device which may or may not have reach. We make that possible.
Anne?
Hi, my name is Anne Shelley. I'm Managing Director of Pearl TV, which is a consortium of 8 of the larger broadcast station groups in the U.S. And the most important thing that we're working on is ATSC 3.0, which is the next generation television platform. And I would say it's revolutionary because it's the first IP broadcast TV platform for over-the-air. An important component of the platform is its base signaling system, which allows it to evolve and not ever have to have a backward compatibility issue. That's the first of its kind.
Hi, I'm Travis Lusk from Sorensen Media, and I'd say the most exciting thing that we're going to be doing over the next year is actually bringing addressable television or addressable advertising to local television. So over the air, cable, satellite, doesn't matter how the programming gets to the television set, the set will be able to do all the dynamic ad insertion, ad replacement, et cetera, and we're bringing that to the local level first. So local broadcast stations will be able to offer this to their clients. And I would say it's evolutionary more than revolutionary, because this type of thing is going to happen no matter what we all do. It's going to happen eventually, so it's more evolutionary.
All right,
David Clevenger. I am Senior Director for Product Management at Clearleap, which is now part of the IBM Cloud Video Unit. I would say the thing that I'm most excited about and we are concentrating on right now, I would characterize as cognitive video solutions. I think I agree with Nikos in terms of uncovering that deeper, dark metadata around individual assets and segments of assets. But we want to apply some of that same learning to the audience as well and to the services as well, and making correlations between all of those things. In that sense, I do think it's revolutionary because you're going to be able to offer different models for advertising, different models for subscriptions, and different services based on that.
Hi, I'm Eric Anderson. I'm Senior Vice President of Personalization for GraceNote, and we do both metadata as well as ACR services. Probably what we're doing is more evolutionary in that we are defragmenting the video ACR market by creating Service Bureau and an exchange that allows TV manufacturers, smart TV manufacturers, to get more access to inventory holders and more inventory holders to get more access to the cross-screen presence and scale of smart TVs. And we're also working in addressable advertising at the national and local market as well.
Terrific. So I work at Visible World, and Visible World is a Comcast company. And for many years, you know, cable companies fought satellite companies, they fought telcos, they fought overbuilders, and it seemed like very big business. But when you look up now, you see there's a much larger business going on. There's a sort of a worldwide battle of how to best monetize content. And what's interesting about this battle is it's a philosophical battle, right? You have some people who believe in advertising, right? The best way to monetize content is to sell advertising with it. You have some people who think the best way to monetize it is sell subscriptions, Netflix. You have people who think you should monetize content by selling devices along with it, right? Apple makes most of its money from selling devices. You have companies like Amazon who feel like you should sell things, maybe you should sell advertising, you should sell unlimited subscriptions. And so there are many different, it's not just different technologies, but radically different philosophies about how to monetize content. Now, usually what happens in a technological world like that is you get a dominant player. You get a Google or a Facebook or a Cisco, and all those companies are involved in this. Do you think, I'll start with you, James, coming from a dominant player, do you think we're going to get a dominant player that somebody's going to have 70% share of this is the way to monetize content?
It's a great question. I think, first of all, you know, Cisco's out of the device game. We don't make set-top boxes anymore. We've passed that on to Technicolor, which I think it's very much a bring-your-own-device world. I think as far as the models that people will use, I think you have to have the flexibility, because we certainly have customers that don't know how to make money. They initially try and get the brand out there. They start with free, then they go for let's try advertising. They're disappointed by the revenue because they're typically very niche channels and appealing to the
So these are people coming to Cisco with content?
Yeah, they're coming to Cisco with
they
content.
really don't know anything.
No, and we offer them distribution on every platform so they can get out there. As far as having dominant...
Cisco is a distribution company. You're a content distribution company.
We distribute
now.
content for our customers on multiple platforms. At one level, the other level, we do work with service providers to help them provide end-to-end systems so they can monetize their solutions as well. Typically, that's traditional pay TV packages, but we're also seeing skinny bundles coming along as well. People are deploying on specific boxes, like our partnership with Roku, where for the price of a couple of coffees, you can get a streaming media player, watching HD at home with a day pass. So it's cheaper than going to a sports bar with your buddies. You can have them home for a few beers, and you can monetize at a weekend pass.
Dominant player?
I think it's going to be, again, the content. It's all about the content. So people who have the best content, that's going to be live media, it's going to be new reality formats and telenovelas if you're in other parts of the world. So content is always going to be king, but I think it's still...
Jerry Levin used to say content was king, but distribution was the sword behind the throat.
I see that's a challenge that our customers have as well, but in the app universe, where you have to have an app for everything, you have to dedicate a significant amount of money towards publicizing your app. And that's where the incumbents have the advantage, because they can promote their skinny bundles over the traditional broadcast.
David is going to leap across if we don't let him say something now. David.
Let me challenge the framing of the question, which is the notion that someone sitting in an office is going to define the business model ad infinitum for every subscriber or every viewer for that content from the top down for that organization. I don't think that's the next step. I think the next step is you understand who that user is, you understand what content you've got, and you understand what they are willing, that individual person is willing to exchange. Attention, money, a pint of blood, lock of hair, whatever it is, to get access to that piece of content. But it's going to be different for you than it is for me.
So
that's where I think it's going to
I'll push back. Right now, if I'm a content owner, I make mass deals. I don't go, the people who sell things one at a time are the people who don't have those mass deals. You don't go self-publishing on Amazon if you have a publisher who's willing to buy 200,000 books. So I don't know if I buy, maybe in the future, but that's not the way media's worked. Because media says, if I have something really good, I'm going to get as much money out of it in the beginning, and I'm going to get as much money out in the end. But I'm not going to risk it all to see whether it works or doesn't.
But I'm not removing the context of time from that equation either. When a piece of content is new versus when a piece of content is a legacy piece of content, it has a different value for you as a user. So when I think about that deeper amount of metadata that's attached to any given asset, I'm not removing time from that component. I'm suggesting that time will be a factor for that asset or that body of assets for a group of users.
I'm just saying that's not how media deals are
It's not how media
now.
deals work, but
right.
once you enable it, once you have that deep metadata around the content and a deeper understanding, an actionable understanding around the user, then you can enable these other business models.
So
Someone's going to try it.
Does anyone think that technology is going to play a role in this?
Yes, I think so. I think that because, I mean, content owner, for example, we have an innovation lab with 21st Century Fox, because machine learning is one of the topics that will be embedded in anything we do it now going. So they are working on it, and they are working on what will be, virtual reality. So how will impact their movie, how the people want to consume a movie, going forward. So to be honest, in the last years, I think that we have seen content owners so much worried about technology, and that's so willing to understand much more. Normally we work with service provider, Ericsson, so we have the entire end-to-end TV suite, but working with the service provider. Last years we are working a lot with content owners, and that's, so it's, for me it's a proof point that for them, start to matter technology as well.
So what you're saying is that content owners are starting to feel like they really need to understand the technology.
Yes, and to be closer to consumers. So this direct to consumer, so the value chain is not any longer a value chain, because before there was content owner, service provider to distribute. Now they want to go direct to consumer.
Right, but so how does 21st Century Fox, which on one hand is a very large company, but compared to the reach of a Google or a Facebook or an Apple, they're a very small company. And those companies all can reach 1 billion people through their devices or through their social graph or through their search. How does 21st Century Fox compete in that world?
But they don't want to become a distribution. They want to just be sure that their content is going to be appealing for the people. So they are trying to understand how to leverage technology in order to enrich their content.
I'm saying that there are people who are saying how technology is going to leverage content. In other words,
I see that as well. We have customers who want to have that direct relationship. The advantage you mentioned, Apple, Google, Facebook, to some extent, have billing relationships direct with consumers, which
and identities,
and that's something we see where customers suddenly say, actually, I want to have people register, but then you have PII considerations. You want to start doing transactions. You've got to do PCI compliance. So suddenly these are different domains which content owners have to learn about, which they haven't had that domain expertise.
So I'm going to switch actually to something that David started to bring up, because I do think it's a reasonable question. If you think about today's world, in the television world, there are 5 factors that go into TV. The content, the advertising, the dollars spent, the amount of time people give, and the amount of information they're willing to give. And distributors, what they do is they package it, right? They buy a certain amount of content in bulk. They have a certain amount of users in bulk. They trade some of that information. All those business models rely on scale. You very rarely buy things one at a time, right? If I go to Sony and I want to buy the Blacklist, I can't buy 19 copies and hope, maybe in the physical distribution, but not in the virtual distribution. But technology may make some of that possible. So content creation probably isn't subscaled, but what about things like the data that we use and the metadata, or the purchases or the distribution? Do those sort of things enable different business models, the likes of which you're talking about, where I can microscale, I can design my own cable package where I can exactly pick the things I want, and someone's going to figure out how much it should cost me with advertising, without? Is that possible?
Yeah, it absolutely is possible once you get to that deeper level of understanding of individual bodies of users and able to make those correlations between the kinds of assets they're consuming based on that deeper metadata, and then tying those two things together. You can certainly then imagine a very rules-driven engine that says, define these parameters, define bodies of assets, define groups of users, What are the correlations between them? Show me my rate of return if I sell them this body of assets for an X amount, and then be able to leverage that. So it's macroeconomics.
There's got to be but there's got to be a capital change, right? You know, Ann works with local broadcasters. They invest in content that millions of people will see every night, right? So somebody's got to risk a lot of capital to say that those millions of people will show up even if you sell it one at a time.
Well, there's also a distinction is that we have a requirement to serve, we have a public service requirement as well. So
that too.
Yeah, that's that tiny little requirement. And, you know, the point you brought up about aggregation, though, I think that, you know, in local broadcasting, you are going to see things happen, especially around the ATSC 3.0 platform, where broadcasters will look to aggregate technology platforms and other things that don't make sense for them to individually spend money on. And it's already starting to happen amongst station groups, and I think that makes a lot of sense. The other is the aggregation of marketplaces that allow brands and agencies to purchase local more easily than they can do today, because local broadcasting is at risk on its advertising revenue side of the house to national and to digital. And I think that there's a lot of power in local. We do represent a significant amount of viewing on our with our news programming, and I don't think that's going to go away. But at the same time, if we are at risk if we don't aggregate. And so I think you'll start to see different levels of aggregation. It's already starting with basic announcements being made by Sinclair and Tribune and others in the marketplace.
Travis,
sorry, perspective from a personalization point of view is that scale really is relevant based on what services and what use case you're trying to get to, meaning that if I'm after audience and advertising measurement and data, I can probably get away with less, or I can probably get away with less TV or ACR penetration than if I was going to get into addressable advertising. Because addressable advertising is all about screens, all about impressions, and so forth. So I think there's going to be variance of what scale is needed and when it's not. But to your point, technology fills in where the scale stops, and you can start to use other means of understanding the attribution of what's happening there on the screen and with the consumer without necessarily have to deploying every single device out there.
So I'll direct this to Travis, since this is on the edge of what some of the things that you're thinking about. In television today, the higher your ratings, the higher the CPM, right? So it's almost universal, right? The highest CPMs are the Olympics and the Super Bowl, and the Academy Awards and the Golden Globes, and it's a geometric curve. So when you get down to lighting up addressable sets, like what replaces that curve?
Yeah, so it shifts to a different model where every impression has a value as long as you can match it up with the most appropriate advertiser willing to pay for that impression. So I think overall it puts more value on each commercial opportunity in the long run. So instead of having to sell or buy shows that are going to have the best performance across all possible ideal demos, you can now be more selective. And we're actually already with our customers seeing that. So
let me push back on that one point. Sure. In the internet, they said that, and the opposite happened, right? They turned eyeballs into commodities.
Yeah.
And so how do we not rush down that same...
I think it's a completely different environment, television versus what's on the internet, because certainly on the internet there's a lot more shitty content that has a lot lower value out there versus what's in television. So when you're starting with the premium content in the first place, you're not necessarily going to be exposed to all those things. Certainly we'll open up more choice, though. But I think on the data front, kind of to your earlier question, like the previous session, I think it's adorable that the MVPDs think that they have a walled garden around the data and the consumption patterns in those. Adorable that they think that they have that, because right here on this panel, there's at least 4 companies that have way more granular information about what's going on in those markets and across those networks that are now bringing that information back to the original content creators. So the time frame in which they are now the gatekeepers across all that stuff it's literally ending this year, I think. So yeah. It's going to be a dramatic shift, and there's 3-4 very viable solutions right here on this panel to be able to accomplish that for local broadcasters.
So the screen in the living room is really the last frontier to get into personalization, from one to many, moving into one to some, and eventually some level of one-to-one type of relationship.
And what does that mean, one-to-one relationship?
Understanding enough about the behaviors, the personas of that household or that individual to have a direct correlation with what you want to show them, how much you want to show what you're showing, and even into the advertising, what types of brands, products, or services you want to do there. So and as long as the end user...
Give me an example. Give us an example of that.
Well, if I'm male over 50, interested in Toyota products, I might be more interested in a Toyota Tundra than a Celica. And so my household information through cross-referencing and other sources will be able to give an advertiser to say, I'm selling Tundras, or I'm selling Celicas. I don't want that person's household. I want to go to the next. Or if I'm a program creator, I might, when I'm creating a new program, I'm going to start looking at new sources of data to understand what geographic areas and what personas are most interested in survivalist types of original showcases and things of that nature.
I'll give you one opposite. The reason TV, you get to charge so much for those very big shows is because by and large, it's historically been very tough to actually understand intent. You say you're a Toyota household interested in Toyota. Toyota doesn't know which households they're interested in.
Because the sources of that data have been terrible for the last 15 years.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not just the sources of the data. It's also, look, most companies, you buy their products less than once a year. You don't have constant behavior with them. All consumer products follow what's called an NBD curve, right? Which means most of their buyers hardly ever buy their products. Yet that's the source of growth, because the people are already buying. You don't need to advertise to them. And this sounds a lot like the web, where I think a lot of what goes on the web is a sort of take credit for strategy. The guy who's interested in Toyota probably is going to buy it. He doesn't need to hear that call. It sounds like you're trying to turn TV into the web, and my worry about that is that hasn't worked out so well for property owners. I don't know if you've checked the newspaper. There's no one really making, like, the people who are making money on advertising on television are the technology companies, not the content providers.
But wouldn't it be great to that guy that you know is already going to buy the Toyota?
But you don't know this.
But you do.
If you do, then what do you need to advertise to him?
Well, correct, to that guy. But to his neighbor next door, he is influenceable.
Bottom of the funnel. TV's a growth. TV is all about growth.
Today.
Well, I mean, that's why people spend $70 billion a year is to grow their business.
I think you're going to see it. It'll still always be the upper funnel end, but I think the bottom of the funnel is going to get a heck of a lot wider than it is today, especially on the local level.
I just wanted to comment on. I think there's a little bit of both of you guys are right, and I know you're being.
I don't believe in anything.
But I think we're, with local broadcasters and broadcasting, we're in the early innings of addressable and understanding does 1 + 1 = 3 when we start to target and segment markets. And you've heard, there's automation trials going on, and so I think it's still early days to really know.
Where's the addressability actually happening? Is it in an ATSC box? Is it in a TV? Where's it actually happening?
On the new ATSC 3.0 platform, you can enable addressability. It has a back channel, so it would utilize. But that said, you would have to have Wi-Fi or something in the device, and ATSC is a transmission standard. It doesn't set the receiver standard side of it. So we're working with the receiver manufacturers, but you would be doing a data collection and then taking that data and enabling targeting on that particular device via the transmission.
And ours happens just in the chipset in the TVs, without the need for watermarking.
And so when do you think televisions will be able to smoothly splice in advertisements?
Right now.
Right now.
We're doing it today.
Yeah, we have customers doing it today, pure OTT, getting even new units like pre-roll to live.
But ours is in over-the-air broadcast with seamless, frame accurate. So it's happening today. We'll be beta testing it at the end of this year.
So the point is from a big screen to a small screen. So Of course, I mean, that is happening because video data, I mean, is moving very much into the small screen. The point is that advertisement, targeted advertisement on a small screen is not yet there from measurement perspective. So, I mean, how to measure? I mean, when you are on a digital, on a mobile, you know, what you are watching. So, I mean, all the banners that are there, people are just skipping banners. So, the real point is that now, big brand, they are still much more familiar to spend money, invest in a big screen, in a programmatic advertisement like you were saying, you know, with a big show and so on, rather than on a small screen, just because they don't trust. I mean, they don't have...
It's not just because of that. It's also because even today, the bulk of viewing are on big screens, and the massive audiences are on big screens. A night of local broadcast is all of YouTube for a month.
Yes, but I mean, things...
They're big brands because they have to reach lots of people.
If you think also a bit outside US, I know we're in US is a big country. I mean, but if you think about, for example, Google and Facebook, we are working very much with them because, and they are the biggest publishers. So the ones that are really earning money from mobile advertisement are both these two guys. And if you think about these two guys, where they are looking at India, they are looking at, Asia Pacific. They are looking at Africa. So exists a world outside US where, I mean, mobile usage is much more than, I mean, there is not a linear TV with a cable operator. So, I mean, and if you think in a world perspective where big brand like, I don't know, I mean, all the big brands are thinking about, that's, I mean, there is a big part of population that, I mean, are consuming video in a completely different way. So probably, I mean, there is some topic that is very much US-based, I mean, on how it's organized, and also some that is outside US.
So let's pick up on something you said.
Can I just interrupt here? Because I think there's a misconception about mobile advertising. I don't think it's necessarily the measurement issue. I think that the intrusiveness level of a 30-second spot on TV is something that we've learned to accept. Whereas if you're watching something on your mobile and you're holding it here and then there's a 30-second mid-roll that you can't skip, those two are very different experiences. So even if we could measure and charge the same or even more for that 30-second spot, a lot of people are going to get turned off by that. That's a challenge that I don't think anyone's really solved to the extent of how do you make that transition to the mobile space.
I want to pick up on transmission and maybe 5G. There was a famous, Nicholas Negroponte made a observation that phone calls would be wireless and television would be wired. And now we're starting to see rumblings about large-scale back to terrestrial broadcasts. We heard a little bit about ATSC 3.0. So 5 years from now, terrestrial versus wired, up or down? What do you think?
Well, I think wireless, I think, will be up overall, because I think all these TVs that we're surrounded by right now will have wireless carrier chipsets in the TV itself.
I don't mean local wireless. I don't mean from the home.
You mean wide area?
Yeah.
Broadband wireless.
Mm-hmm.
I think 5G provisions that exactly. The whole goal of the 5G standard is to enable simultaneous access for video streams. We look at, as referenced earlier on, the Cisco VNI report shows that
IP multicast over 5G?
I don't know about multicast. It's still going to be unicast. There's still issues with the network. Multicast is trying to solve a problem of congested networks. If you can up the standards to solve those problems, that's going to be helpful. But I still think, people will view much more content over their broadband devices. I think people might object to streaming ads that they're paying for the data plans on. So that's more of an issue. So certainly Cisco's working with customers to see how we can zero rate data for video because it's a different category.
I think there's a big difference between dropping a call on a website on your mobile phone and then your whole movie going off or buffering in front of your 4 kids on a Sunday. So even if wireless increases, which it definitely will, it always does, but it's not going to be one over the other. It's going to be a blend, and it's going to be more of a consumer choice to say, that gives me the best experience. And it doesn't take consumers very long these days to sit on a couch to say, that works or that sucks. So they'll figure it out, but it's going to be a combination of both. You can't stop attenuation. I mean, you can't mow down trees and hills and steel structures. It's going to happen. So it's going to be a both. But I think what's really important is that the consumer, you say who's the one that's going to decide on the pricing and things of that nature. We're forgetting about the fourth leg of the R&D system right now, which is the person sitting on the couch. They already know more than what they did 2 years ago on how to get content where. And the affinity that they have in the industry today is not with the device, it's not with the operating system, it's maybe not even with the content, it's probably content and experience together. And they can figure that out without the help of anybody's logo telling them what to do.
So I would actually agree with what Eric said, which is both. What I like about the ATSC 3.0 platform, it enables the consumer to have an experience where that's hybrid, where the broadband and the over-the-air is together, and consumers can toggle back and forth easily. They can put shows on pause, and they can have, and they don't care where it's coming from. They want that best consumer experience. If it's a live linear broadcast, it needs to be one-to-many, and you can think about all of those types of shows. They would receive that over the air, and then if it's something that needs to come over the broadband side, it's a show that they want to watch off of Hulu or Netflix or whatever, they can do that in a very seamless way, and that's what's great about this platform. It's also compression technologies are 5G, HEVC, A9. We're going to see better compression for over the air, and that's not going to stop. And also additional spectrum being allocated. Obviously, broadcaster spectrum going to wireless here with the auctions. But I think you're going to see this hybrid experience, and that's really what you should see. So the best use of spectrum for that type of content that needs to reach that person or many people at the same time.
I think to echo some of the comments, consumers don't care. They care about bandwidth, reliability, and cost. So when you get that mix right, I don't care if I'm getting it wirelessly or through fiber, as long as I find the right mix for me, whatever works. So I agree, it will probably end up being, as an industry, it will be a mix because you have to address those different.
Right now in the TV world, just point out, they never have to think, in traditional TV, they never have to think about bandwidth. They don't think about cost. They don't think about transmission cost or things like that. And usually not reliability. Those have not been one of the things I'm always curious about is all of these technologies, any of them going to make more money? In other words, I was talking to James earlier. Television distribution used to be incredibly cheap, right? If you ran a local broadcast, WNBC, their budget in New York City, and they used to represent 40% of the profits of General Electric, that one station. Their budget was under $1 million. They had to pay for the maintenance of the antenna, and they had to put tapes in a cart. It was nothing. And now we have all of this incredibly expensive technology. Is it going to make any more money for anyone? Or is it just more technology tax on the content distribution business?
I think you're referring to a time when it was basically an oligopoly. You had very few players in the market, and the entry point, even though it wasn't a lot, was high. So not everyone could create content and broadcast it. So now you're having to compete for eyeballs with many other different platforms that cost nothing. Right? You can go and create your YouTube channel and compete effectively for eyeballs and time with anyone out there. So no, I don't think those times will come back in terms of the margins, but the market is much more segmented now. So,
Yeah, and there's far more types of content being generated now too. I mean, if you factor in, let's say Twitch, for example, which is doing many-to-many broadcasting all around gaming. They have very high metrics around time spent, around average user engagement. I mean, that's an entire business that didn't exist before.
Does anyone know what Twitch is?
Twitch.tv. It's
watching people play video games.
Watching people play video games, but it's
sometimes it's watching people watch people play video games.
Yeah, I think that's what it is, and I'm not. It's Amazon bought them for I think short of $1 billion, right? So that's the kind of content that was previously not able to be generated. It wasn't able to be monetized. There wasn't a platform for it. You couldn't have sold that idea 20 years ago as a business, and now it's doing very well. So I think that the technology has enabled the growing of the pool of the audiences and the growing of the pool of the assets that are coming in. That's why it's going to make more money.
Go.
We have a variety of customers on our platform millions of sessions per month. And the average session length is 17 minutes. So these are people watching long-form content, movies, live events, purely over the internet, on big screens, Apple TVs, Fire TVs, and echoing some of the thoughts earlier on, the measurement companies are not able to measure these events effectively. So our customers are doing that. We give them all the metrics, and they're going out and selling this inventory. It's relatively limited inventory, but they're able to get high CPM for it because it's limited, but they're able to target their audience, and it's all about the content. Again, I mean, the barrier to entry, very, very low, but you still have to produce really good content, and that's going to cost you far more than it is to distribute it today, which I think is a big change without having that big capex in putting up towers, doing transmission.
And in any case, I think that a lot of things are already happening, because merger and acquisition between, for example, service provider, I mean, here Cable, Time Warner with Charter, I mean, there is a lot of things are happening just because of what you are saying. I mean, economics behind. I mean, there is a lot of investment, technology is there, new technology, and so it's not sustainable, I think, the players that, what we will see is that a lot of evolution in the players that will rule the TV, the video, I mean, going forward. If you think about the media from a magazine perspective, when I was young, I mean, I was buying a lot of magazines. If I wanted to know about fashion, I was buying magazine. I have a 21 years daughter. I never saw her buying one magazine. What she gets from, and she's very much into fashion, so she gets it from Snapchat, from Instagram, the blogger on internet. So this is, I mean, has been a revolution from this perspective, because still, I mean, people are looking at, I mean, searching for something, looking for something, but they found it in a different place from where traditionally they found. And that's what's going to happen on TV and video as well.
I'm going to switch subjects to metadata, because the panel is aching to talk about metadata, and the mics are primed. We've lived a long time with very little metadata, or metadata created by your company of old ladies, you know, scrubbing notes about what's on a TV show. Why is it so important that you're investing millions of dollars into metadata?
To drive a lot of these business models we were just talking about. I mean, if you think about NBC, you mentioned NBC, imagine the entire body of content that they own that has literally millions and millions of hours of content that hasn't been described at the segment level, that hasn't been described at the conceptual level. You know, if every movie, every television show, if you can apply, like, even conceptual things, the hero's journey, and then being able to make a correlation between that catalog of content and the user who is interested in that content and what their pain point is in terms of what they would pay to get access to it, that's why it's important.
It's audience acquisition.
Absolutely.
I think it's a very
That's what it's about. Sorry. And I would say now, in addition to what's going on in the living room on the screen, but what am I doing in sports? Why do I care about that? What am I listening to in my car when I'm coming home? So a lot of that metadata is going to be able to join with return path data and have a better perspective of behavior profile on who you are when you're coming home, what you're watching to, because when you get into your living room, what everybody's interested in is getting to the right content fast. And so metadata helps you either naturally do that, or behind the scenes can anticipate what you're watching and where you've come from and actually present that first.
So let me give you and then I'll let you stomp in on what I say, a Luddite perspective on this. There's an interesting Harvard economics professor, I think his name is Galinsky, and he did a very interesting study. He looked at the patrimony of famous artwork to see at what age did people paint, you know, and he found that it really was two levels. Some things, there were some painters that their most valuable work was done when they were very young, people like Picasso, and there were some that it was done when they were very old, people like Van Gogh. And it wasn't this, it was a bathtub. And the idea was that he felt, at least in art, that some artists are revolutionary, and it's the newness that makes it so interesting. You can think of it works with popular music also. There are bands whose their first album was by far the most popular, then it went down. Or there are artists, you know, again, I'll date myself, Fleetwood Mac, Tusk, I think, is their 15th album, right? It took them 20 years to get there. They evolved with it. And so one of the things that worries me is, if you looked at the metadata for the first 2 seasons of Seinfeld, you would have killed it. Someone had to be inspired to say, there's something there. Trust my judgment, trust my taste. These people who are watching it had terrible ratings. They're going to take it off the air. It took a while to grow on the audience. And so my worry is you're putting everyone's finger on this trigger of like it, don't like it. And we know that a lot of great work takes time to mold with the audience.
So I want to bear in on that. So I think what we're doing, at least in metadata, is we're observing behavior. And what we're trying to answer is the question of why. So why are people watching? Why are they flipping off after the first season? And right now, when you look at most of the metadata in the industry has been very descriptive. So it's very high level in terms of a series. It's a comedy, this is the director, these are main actors. As you dig deeper and you try looking at the main themes, you look at personality traits, you look at the ebb and flow of the season and how it changes in terms of going from crime to horror, and you have the viewership data, then we're trying to get better intelligence of what's happening behind the scenes in aggregate, right?
But here's a worry about that. So everyone know who Frank Lutz is? He's a famous Republican pollster. And he does these things when politicians speak, people have meters, I forget what they're called, and they say, whether they like something or they don't like something. I forget what they're called.
The dial meter?
Yeah, they used to be old potentiometers for everyone who remembers that word. And so what happens is politicians learn certain words are good and that people like them, and certain words are bad, and it sort of promotes a kind of nihilism, right? That's how we say, we repeat words over and over again, not because there's meaning to them, but because they register unconsciously. And so, how do we content shouldn't be a vote. It shouldn't be like this great democratic thing. I'm an elitist in this.
No, but what you're looking at...
And you're telling me like everyone's going to get to vote on, what the season is.
So that's not what I'm saying. So last year there were 400, or this year there are 400 seasons in the U.S. Some of those are very long tail, no one's ever heard of, but people are watching those. And right now, most consumers, there's a very good TED Talk, The Paradox of Choice. Most consumers have an immense amount of choice, and yet they can't find what to watch. Rovi did a study last September, I think it was 19 minutes average spent, and 67% of consumers said, look, if I had a better choice, if I had a better recommendation...
No, less choice.
So if I had a better recommendation engine...
Less choice. 3 or less choice, you value the content more.
But
that's why people rarely go beyond the first page.
We're not going to
guide,
reduce the content. No one's going to go down that path. So we have to find better ways to recommend. And that's really where
I'm just pointing out the dark side to these things.
There is a dark side.
The dark side today is you've got 25 to 40,000 people determining the success of that season.
Yeah. Or people with
So what would you rather have? I mean...
Well, but you have programmers with faith who overrule that,
of course,
right?
And programmers use data to make better decisions. And
or instinct.
And instinct, both. And not only what you're doing on the TV, but what you're taking in from other mediums as well. So it's dangerous if not used properly, but in the role of an artist or a storyteller, it's very valuable.
You can also reach other audiences over the top as well. We've had examples this morning where people haven't had hits on a broadcast perspective, but they've gone up the charts on the OTT perspective. So if you're a content owner, you want to monetize regardless if it's just a pilot. There'll still be people who watch it and like it, and you might get commissioned to make that again with a different audience. So it's getting the reach on
even the concept
geographically and device-wise.
Even the concept of pilot. I mean, does Netflix pilot anymore? No. They do that, but based on what viewership and the return path and everything else is telling them, the amount of money and expense and time and disappointment that goes through the pilot process is enormous. That's not relevant anymore. So the new model and the new way of watching, the new way of creating is really dependent upon understanding the behaviors.
Part of that is Netflix never publishes, and in fact they go out of their way to stop folks like you from publishing the viewership of Netflix. So they may say they don't pilot, but we also don't know what's completely bombed because they're not willing to share it, and they're preventing folks like you from being able to share it.
But they don't anymore because companies like Symphony are able to fingerprint what is going on Netflix and be able to
Except the big, large TV manufacturers have been signed deals with Netflix. Where
no, that's an audio ACR. It has nothing to do with TV manufacturer.
Right, but that's a voluntary one, which...
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's a tiny, tiny... If Netflix were really transparent, they wouldn't be blocking the likes of Samsung and Vizio from reporting numbers.
But the point being is that is a point in time today, And
Just
and
saying,
the
don't take the
technology
don't take the no
of what's
pilot
here
stuff as
today will
seriously.
continue to get better, and consumers will continue to opt in to be able to provide their thumbs up on thumbs down on a lot of these programs.
We have about 3 minutes, so I want to see if you guys are great. I'm throwing my best stuff at you, and you're hitting it back really well. So I'm curious, questions from the audience? Give the audience a chance to stump the panel.
I think they're hungry.
They're hungry? Steve Murdos, you have a question for all these folks? We have some celebrities in the room. All right. Well, any questions? All right. This was terrific. I learned a lot, and I learned why metadata is important. So I appreciate very much.
And we learned why opera is so important as well. Thank you.
There you go.